in some sense, because I'm going to be giving a little bit of an overview of one of the papers that we put in the special issue, rather than taking an overlook of the field as it is at the moment, but more about the field, you know, as we would like it to be, and some of the methods that we think we should employ. So I appreciate that a lot of people here are going to probably come from a lot of different backgrounds, you know, combinations of researchers, developers, and, you know, autistic community members, and however those things intersect. But these methods are something that I feel like everyone should be able to get involved with and endorse. And so that's why I hope that certainly I'm more than happy to take any questions afterwards if people would like to talk about actually doing it. So just to start off with, I thought I'd just describe sort of what the problem that these participatory action research, or just generally inclusive research, is trying to solve. And so the first thing to think about is just like what do we actually want to do research on? So this is probably from a well-used report from Autistica. So this is their collection of all community priorities that they put together, and they've got listed which ones sort of they have been funded in the years, so was it 2013 to 2016? So it's not necessarily, this isn't the only set of priorities. I know there are quite a few exercises ongoing at the moment, trying to sort of do the same thing, of being like, what do autistic people want to actually have researched? And so if it has been kind of things like, you know, mental health, social care, sort of sensory processing. But the problem then is when you contrast that with these two slides, which these are from the latest reports, so from Autistica for the UK, and then the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, which is basically sort of the American NIH research body, who are, you know, basically they're tracking all of the American research funding. And I think I've chosen these two because these are reports that exist, but I think probably the similar trends will be existing sort of globally. But the key thing to take away, especially on that right-hand pie chart there, is that, you know, basic biology is taking up 45% of research funding, and which you can kind of just about assume means about, you know, research efforts, a lot of which is just going to be genetics, which I think, if anyone can remember from a long time ago with the Spectrum 10K thing, is not necessarily what people are going to be wanting, and has some controversial, maybe the word to use, elements to it. And I've chosen funding here as just sort of an exemplar of the state of, you know, the autism research field in general, which is where it's not really meeting the priorities of the autistic community, and it is often filled, the research is often based in stigma and discrimination. So we you know, think about the way that we often can talk about autistic people, as we were saying in the language statement earlier. It's like some kind of problem that we're going to be trying to solve. You know, so you've got question 3, risk factors, you know, as though one of the great important things we should be trying to do is preventing anyone from being autistic again, which I think is just a very harmful mindset as an area, and certainly for the people that in theory, you know, you're working to try and help in theory. So I go into a bit more detail about why sort of these disconnects and these issues arise, but that's in a special issue, and it's probably a discussion for later in this sort of quick summary thing. So then what I want to do is move into what actually are sort of participatory methods. So the classic sort of framing that's used is this Einstein's ladder of citizen participation. So it does actually come from public policy in the 1960s, but it can be applied and has been applied to lots of other things. We're trying to bring, you know, community members, stakeholders into processes. I mean, in this case, research, not necessarily public policy. And not to say it's perfect. I think there are plenty of people who have now moved on to critique this particular model, but as a just sort of general way of thinking, it works pretty well. Where, you know, at the lowest level, you know, you're manipulating people, you're therapizing people, you're trying to sort of fix them, enforce the sort of homogeneity on, you know, making them all one way. And as you're moving up there, so for a lot of science and a lot of public policy tends to be more on the informing consultation level of things. So, you know, we can disseminate research. We will in theory, go out and give presentations like these to people, telling them about what we're doing, but there's no real agency from the community there about directing where that goes, or being meaningfully involved, which is what those sort of higher levels, partnership, delegated power, citizen control are. And basically it just comes down to the lower down on the ladder it is, the less responsive you're going to be to community needs and community wants. So there are a few different models of participatory research that you can go with. And so I've nicked these from Fletcher Watson's paper that you can see on the bottom there. And despite and I guess the main criticism of the ladder is that in theory, the ladder makes it seem very linear, when that's not really the case. So I think we all live under constraints, right? So for example, I'm a PhD student. I don't have a big research budget that I can use to be going and paying people to, work for me necessarily, but there are smaller things that I've been able to do, within that. So for example, in my main project, I've been able to pay people sort of as participants, as a way of letting them come on board, give me their feedback as I've been developing my own virtual reality app. And for some my other projects, I've got a sort of a steering group or oversight board who will be making sure that all of my conclusions are fitting. That's not just sort of my kind of neurotypical style way of thinking on their autistic words. So it's things like that. And as I say, nothing is easy in this. I mean, especially in academia, where it can sometimes feel like you've just got a tsunami of projects and deadlines coming towards you that you're just going to try and keep going as you have. But literally, I guess my key message is just going to be do what you can, and it will definitely better. So a few of these models, so consultation is bringing people in at key decision points, asking them their opinion, and then allowing, making sure that can shape it. And that which nicely brings you to the point of that, it has to be meaningful. So I think we've all experienced consultations from upper managements of different kinds, where they will ask you in a survey your opinion, and then you look at what they do and it's clear that they've just completely disregarded it and it was a complete exercise. That is what you want to avoid at all costs. I think that will burn bridges with anyone that you're working with, and is just generally not a good thing to do. Just really misusing their trust. But you've got the other versions, so partnerships, about you're bringing lots of people together with all of their unique skill sets. I think it's always important to remember that autistic people are not just mindless blobs. I mean, they have skills that you can use, and that they are happy to contribute. Same thing with collaboration, which is so collaboration, citizen science leadership, that moves away from, I guess, that sort of lower ladder stuff of bringing people onto your project, and is much more about bringing autistic people, working with autistic people on a project, so that as a neurotypical researcher, for example, you might not be leading it, but you are certainly facilitating them from helping. And if you want a good number of sort of resources about how to think about doing this, I would recommend the Inclusive Practices paper down below. And I think this is certainly for autism research. It's still a bit of a new field. We don't entirely know. There aren't guidelines specifically. Checkbox things you can do, but generally speaking, it seems to be pretty effective. So I would recommend checking out Monique Botha from the University of Stirling, who is currently undergoing a sort of Living Human fellowship, looking at stigma among autism researchers. And basically what they've been finding so far is that engaging in these kind of sort of methods significantly reduces the stigma involved in the outputs that you end up producing, more so than, for example, having a family member or having autistic friends. It's very effective at reducing that stigma, and then making sure that by bringing these autistic people on board, the work that you're doing is fitting those needs. So I appreciate now I've talked very generally about autism research as a whole, just to give a general backdrop. But why should you then care about that if you're going to be doing virtual reality research? Well, personally, I believe that, to be honest, virtual reality research is going to be one of those ones where actually bringing these methods in early and now is a perfect sphere to try and do it in. So among other things, yes, the hardware companies, they're doing their part with regards to sort of general accessibility, you know, they're bringing out, you don't need to hold controllers anymore. They can deal with the shaking, for example, all things like that. But if you've ever used the internet, you're aware that a lot of it comes down to that software, like the sort of beyond what has been produced in a factory and what people are actually using it with. And then we think about sort of neurodivergence, autism, as a whole, the needs of the users in that group are just so varied. They're heterogeneous almost by definition, right? Which means that if you as a single designer, for example, you were to sit down and go, okay, what are the accessibility needs for my participants? You're never going to be able to pick up everything. So that, for example, with the VR, it's such a very sensory experience. Autistic people we know very well, have very varied sensory experiences. For example, hypersensitivities to different things, maybe different patterns, all of that, and it's such a key part of the virtual reality experience. You really have to bring it on board. So if you're bringing people in, they can let you know. I mean, they will know people, so it can be just wealth of experience. And if you're bringing that in early into, for example, the product design process, you're doing that early when you can actually make those changes easily, rather than, I think, a trap that many of us have fallen into in the past is, you sort of realize you've made this big mistake at the end, and then you've got to sort of hack it in, and it just doesn't fit very well. And then sort of my final point really is just that I'm not going to make any predictions about how the metaverse is going to take off or whatever, but for a lot of people this will be their first experience of using tech, that may or may not end up becoming very important. You don't want to be responsible for giving them an awful experience because you didn't consider that they may have, for example, different sensory needs or different accessibility needs. So I appreciate that was a very much a whistle-stop tour within this sort of flash talk format of the general points I wanted to get across. I'm happy to talk to people about any of that later on or in this little section here. But yes, basically just the research generally has been problematic. I think Shrone's review found that it still applies to virtual reality, bringing people in a meaningful ways, helping solve those problems, and that yes, virtual reality can definitely benefit from bringing these lessons on board. Thank you.